What's up, guys? Listen, I know this is a gaming channel, but football is a game. Don't worry, this isn't boring sports analysis. I'm gonna talk about football just like I do every other game. Now that all my viewers probably clicked away, football! American football, specifically, is one of the most popular games of all time. The National Football League is the biggest sports league in the world, and millions of people across the globe love to watch NFL football. Thousands of nobodies all over the internet love to ramble on about why this team is better than that team, why I'm a better person than you because my favorite team is good, but that's too surface level for me. Football is such an old tradition with so much emotional stake in it that I feel like I never really see people talk about American football as a game. You know, how it's designed, how the fundamental rules and mechanics function in a pleasant way. Is football itself set up well? That's up to you, but let's talk about it. I'm not Jan Measley, and football is a weird game. American football is a ball-centric team sport where exactly two teams of 11 players at a time try to score more points than the other team, thereby winning the game. The NFL is set up with a yearly schedule and a playoff system, but today we're only going to be talking about the things that can go down in an individual game. I'm about to briefly explain how football is played, so if you know the rules already, you can just skip to the timestamp on the screen right now if you want. As with many sports, football's entire functionality centers around one thing: the ball. You can only score points by using the football, primarily by scoring touchdowns. A touchdown happens when someone on your team is holding the football in this part of the field, called the end zone. If your team has their way, they will always score by getting a touchdown. A touchdown is worth 6 points, which is kind of weird, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, how do you actually go about scoring a touchdown? Generally speaking, a football game happens over the course of numerous plays, which are formally called downs. In between downs, nothing can affect either team's score or the placement of the ball unless there's a penalty or something. One play, or one down of football, consists of this guy, the center, giving the ball to this guy, the quarterback. This exchange is called a snap. Once the quarterback has the football, he and his team try to move forward toward the end zone. If someone gets tackled or the play is otherwise stopped, that down is over and everyone sets up for the next play. When your team has the ball, they get 4 tries to go 10 yards. If you've ever heard someone say 1st and 10, that's what they mean. Your team starts on their first try with 10 yards to go. If they go all 4 tries without getting the full 10 yards at any point, the other team gets the ball. But if all goes well, your team will work their way down the field until someone scores a touchdown. All the while, there's 11 guys on the other side of the ball trying their best to physically stop you from moving forward. Sometimes they'll even take the ball from you early, which means they get a turn to push forward for a touchdown. Football is all about possession and moving the ball, all to try to get downfield for those glorious 6 points. So that's the driving force behind football, but it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. Instead of continuing to explain every game mechanic one by one, let's look at why football is so fundamentally different from other sports. A bit more specifically, we're discussing football as it relates to team sports that center around a ball. And it is very weird among its friends in this category for reasons way deeper than the ball not being round. I'm sorry this setup has been so long, but let's finally talk about why football is such a weird, ball-centric team sport. Reason number 1, football is weird because of its extra point mechanic. Touchdowns are worth 6 points, which is an oddly high number for scores in a ball game, and that's in large part due to the existence of extra points. When and only when a team scores a touchdown, they're given one chance to either run this specific play to score 1 extra point, or run a slightly harder play to score 2 extra points. This dynamic of smaller scores being tied to the main type of score is really fascinating, and really abnormal in the genre of ball-centric team sports. It would seem ridiculous if games like basketball or soccer stopped everything to reward scores with a chance to get some extra points on the board. Why does the rest of the game shut down for this unique opportunity? I'm not saying it's bad, but it's really weird among other similar games. If anything, it's reminiscent of bowling, where any points you earn immediately after a strike are compounded onto each other as a little reward for your success. This concept of a scoring bonus also applies to football. I think it's logical to reward a team right after they score. It's fun, but it also doesn't make a ton of sense. To me, that's one of the fascinating things about sports. Football wasn't created on purpose. Nobody designed it in the way that Nintendo designed Breath of the Wild. There wasn't a team of people sitting down, bouncing game ideas off each other, tweaking mechanics until the game was perfect. It was just a bunch of kids making up a game 150 years ago, and that changed bit by bit over time until we got this massive, multi-billion-dollar industry. I think that's pretty cool, but it also leads to random stuff like the extra point system. Come to think of it, NFL football is also weird because the league is constantly changing the rules of their own game, but that's a topic for another day. The second thing that makes football a weird ball-centric team sport is what's known as place kicking. I'm far from the first person to mention this, but it's still an incredibly hot take. Place kicking, on its face, has absolutely nothing to do with the core gameplay of football. If you don't know, the single extra point option after a touchdown consists of the team bringing out some guy who doesn't do anything else and having him try to kick the football through these 2 yellow goalposts at the back of the end zone. There's also an optional mechanic where if you don't think you can score a touchdown, your team can attempt to kick a field goal through the same goalposts to earn 3 points. That's worth half as many points as a touchdown for you math nerds, and it's always the same 3-point value no matter how far away you move from the goalposts. Nobody tries to get into the end zone, and the offense isn't even on the field, which we'll get to later. It's just some guy whose whole job is attempting a glorified trick shot. Sometimes the defense can block the kick if they want to, but that's very rare, so I'm not sure why these defenders are on the field at all for this part. Even more, the extra point kick has become such a gimme for football teams that plenty of casual football watchers think a touchdown is worth 7 points, because those 6 points almost always come along with an easy extra point. Now, let me be clear, I have nothing against the individuals who kick the football. Justin Tucker, Evan McPherson, Brandon Aubrey, you and your friends are all cool or whatever, but what does this have to do with the game we've been playing? We're driving down the field, trying to score a touchdown, and then we stop everything to bring out this guy, and he tries to kick the ball through these goalposts, which never affect anything else about the game? Imagine if, in the middle of a basketball game, everybody stopped playing so that some skinny dude could walk onto the court and try to throw a bullseye on a dartboard. Like, there is just no correlation between this and this. Some non-NFL football leagues that I've never actually watched have a different extra point system altogether. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the XFL has 3-point after touchdown options, all consisting of the offense trying to get back into the end zone from varying yard lines. This makes way more sense to me because it's actually related to the game of football, where the offense tries to bring the ball into the end zone. At its core, the reason the current system is so odd to me comes down to the presence of multiple scoring mechanics. In almost every sport, there is only one scoring mechanic. In baseball, points are only scored when someone makes it around all 4 of the bases. In basketball, points are only scored when the ball goes through one of the hoops. There are different contexts in which those things can happen, but there's always one specific event that affects the scoreboard, nothing more. Football is so unique because it has 2 scoring mechanics. You get points when someone is holding the ball over here, and you get points when somebody kicks the ball through the goalposts. These are 2 entirely separate functions within the game, and that's not something you see very often in sports. It makes me question the point values of different scores sometimes. Kicking a field goal and throwing a touchdown can never be an apples-to-apples comparison, so why are they worth 3 and 6 points respectively? Why not 2 and 5 or 4 and 7? I feel like nobody has ever discussed why touchdowns are worth 6 points, which is fascinating to me. Again, I'm not hating on kickers, I'm not saying any of this is objectively bad, but it's just weird. It's like there are 2 games in one, and the way they're balanced often makes very little sense. And then, because so many points end up hinging on one guy kicking the football, you get entire fan bases hating on their kicker because he missed an important field goal. Football is a team sport, probably the teamiest team sport, but field goal and extra point kicking is not truly a team activity, and that's weird. There's actually a second job for these place kickers, and it's equally strange to me. Let's say you know nothing about football and the game is about to start. Your team is on offense first, so where do you get to start with the ball? Maybe back over here, so you have to drive all the way down the field. That sounds pretty fair. Maybe that's too hard, so you start at like the 10 or 20 yard line? The 25? Actually, it's completely different every time you get the ball. The place kicker does a kickoff, and then another unrelated guy can try to catch the ball and run somewhere with it to start out the offense. You know, in baseball, you can move the bases around to get a hit easier, or how in soccer you can move the goal around at the beginning to try to get a better shot. Of course you don't know those things, because they're lies. Nobody ever questions it, but why does every offensive drive in football start from a different place? You don't raise and lower the basketball hoop before each jump ball based on some challenge. Granted, if the receiving team does not run with the ball, it starts at a set place every time, but that just makes the kick irrelevant in the first place. Listen, I know kickoffs are fun, they're a tradition, sometimes people get crazy touchdowns, but I feel like this is all very unrelated to the rest of the game. Starting field position is a huge part of football. I get that it's a strategy in its own way, but my point still stands. Bringing this guy out to kick off is not cohesive with the rest of the game. That's okay, but it's weird nonetheless. Quick side note, I know somebody out there is typing, it's actually called football for a reason. Football? I know, I get it, calm down. I understand that the early versions of American football made greater use of the dogs, but that is simply not the game we have today. Football is about running and passing, and I do not see how kicking fits into that. Kicking is a legacy mechanic that does not add very much to the football experience in my opinion. You can disagree, but I still think place kicking is heckin' weird. Reason number 3 that I think football is a weird game comes down to the way teams are set up. In football, your offense and defense is played by 2 entirely separate groups of people. The offensive players are on the field when they're trying to score, and those guys just kinda take a break when it's the other team's turn. In baseball, the fielders are in the hitting rotation. In basketball, the same people play pretty much all the time, but not in football. It's very unique in sports for offensive and defensive players to be different people. In fairness, this system does make sense on a practical level. Football is set up such that offensive and defensive players are, often, doing wildly different things. On top of that, football is exhausting, so maybe people just physically couldn't be on the field that whole time. Nevertheless, this is a weird feature. Looking at football as a game to play rather than an industry, who wants to play a game where you spend half the time sitting out? This separation between offense, defense, and special teams is more a product of the industry than a design element of the game of football. It's not inherently bad, but it's certainly an odd feature. Alright, last up we have football's time limit, which is not weird at all on its face. Basketball, soccer, almost every ball-centric team sport is timed, and most people never blink twice about it. The game's gotta end at some point, right? 60 minutes, 90 minutes, it doesn't really matter. However, what does this actually do for the game of football? Think about it, when you're playing Super Smash Bros. With your friends, what mode do you set the game to? If you're normal, you do stock battles every time. What made old Mario Kart's battle mode so much better than modern battle mode? It was the ability to do stock battles instead of timed matches. Stock battles, when they can be implemented fairly, are almost universally agreed to be more fun than timed matches. Stock battles purely measure who is being the most successful at the game, whereas timed matches exist to arbitrarily say when it's over. Timed Smash Bros. Is less fun to all sane people because there's nothing productive about the time limit. It could be 3 minutes, it could be 20 minutes. You just kind of play until time runs out, and the game tells you who did better. If anything, timed matches limit what any game can be. In this line of thinking, what does football accomplish by being a time-based sport? More than anything, it forces time management itself to become a strategic aspect of football. If your team is losing near the end of the game, you purposely lean toward plays that are going to be able to stop the clock. If you're winning near the end of the game, you purposely run out the clock as much as possible to stop your opponent from scoring. NFL teams play the clock just as much as they play the game, and that's not fun to me. I know it's kind of strategic in its own way, but I think it detracts from the goal of the game. Instead of really going for explosive plays for a last-second comeback, teams throw to the sideline and fight to get out of bounds solely because these plays happen to stop the clock. That to me seems like coaches taking advantage of a bug more than using a feature. I know the game has been played that way for decades, but it just doesn't function in a pleasing way. Clock management takes up too much substance in competitive football games, and it's just not fun to watch if you ask me. If you're still not convinced that time limits are a hindrance to football, allow me to show you this Venn diagram. On the left side, we have games that are timed. Soccer, basketball, hockey, all kinds of fun stuff. On the right, we have games with plays. Rather than a continuous flow of events, these games are split up into distinct plays that regularly stop and start. In the middle, where these concepts cross over, we only have one game that I can think of. You guessed it, it's American football. In almost all other cases, time limits are for games where stuff is always happening. When individual plays are split up, the game almost always has outs or frames or a maximum score to reach. Football is the odd one out here, and I think that's fascinating. You may be sarcastically asking right now, okay loser, then when would a football game end if not when the clock runs out? That's a valid question, and I think it's best answered by America's favorite pastime, baseball. In baseball, there are 9 innings, and your team can keep scoring in an inning as much as they want as long as they don't suffer 3 outs. It's balanced, the games don't go on for 30 years, and every team is theoretically still in the game up until their 3rd out of the 9th inning. Baseball applies the Smash Bros. Stock battle theorem, but for sports. The games aren't timed, they're played out based on who can complete the most objectives before the other team can. As such, I propose a similar system for football. Instead of timing games, what if each quarter allowed both teams 3 unsuccessful possessions of the football? You punt, the other team throws an interception, you lose a fumble, they punt, then you each go 3 and out. Those are both of your 3 unsuccessful possessions, and we move on to the next quarter. If your offense scores 2 touchdowns in a row without getting stopped, good for you. Whenever you score, you now get the ball back in this version. But if you get stopped on 4th down, throw an interception, or otherwise lose the ball, that's the end of your first turn, your first unsuccessful possession. Let's say the next team loses a fumble, so now you get the ball back for your second chance of the quarter. Just like innings in baseball, you can keep scoring if the other team's defense never stops you. It's make it take it for both teams, and once each team has coughed up the ball 3 times, it's on to the next quarter. Obviously, this number could be changed to 2 or 4 or something with testing to keep games about as long as they are now. Could this lead to a situation where a great offense drags the game out for way too long? Probably sometimes. Could a team be up 50 points at the end of the 4th quarter and still lose? Sure they could. Is this a perfect idea for a game mechanic? Absolutely not. At the end of the day, I still think it could be a fun new way to play football. It's unapologetically and entirely focused on the core of the game, moving the ball downfield and stopping your opponent from doing so. No trying to wiggle out of bounds to buy your team some extra time, no kneeling the clock out so your opponent can't score, just good old football. Can you outscore your opponent before you cough up the ball too many times? That, to me, is the essence of the game, and I would want to prioritize that at all costs. As such, I think it's mechanically strange and functionally unproductive to make football a timed sport. I'm sure this plan has some flaws and it would need some development, but I think it's a prospect worth discussing. Let me know what you think in the comments. Wrapping all this up, football is a weird game, right? If nothing else, it's very unique as a ball-centric team sport. It's really exciting to watch and play, but it's got a ton of weird mechanics that you just don't see in other games. I hope you were entertained by this video that doesn't affect society at all. Have a great day.